This is the finance bill for the financial year 2026-2027 financial year, and there are some things that has been added to this finance bill. So in this particular video, I want to take you through some of the things that has been added to this finance bill. So kindly sit down as I explain to you one by one on what it entails. So let's proceed now, and please do consider subscribing. One of the things that is in the finance bill is a new tax has been introduced. This tax is called a tax on 20% of bet winnings. What does this mean now? It means the government under the parliament has proposed a 20% tax on the bet winnings, which will be put on effect as from when the finance bill will be passed into law. Now, what does this mean? This means that, for example, if you win a bet of 10,000, umechambua bet zako vizuri sana. From your bet now, you can stake any amount. From that any amount, you won 10,000 in particular as your winnings. So, when you win 10,000, you will not get that 10,000 directly to M-Pesa. No, the government will take 20% of that 10,000, which means then 20% of your winnings belongs to the government. So, if you do the math, 20% of 10,000 is equals to 2,000. So this particular 2,000 goes directly to the government, and the remaining 8,000 comes to your M-Pesa. So this 20% now entails, it directly means that if, for example, you win a bet, 20% of that bet goes to the government and the remaining comes to your account. But remember, this 20% now, this 20% is the proposed for this financial year. But initially there is a 5% tax on betting. So if you win 8,000, there is 5,000, there is 5% tax. So as you know, kama wewe ni mtu wa betting sana, you know, saa ukideposit na withdraw, serikali wanachukua 5% of that. So ukideposit na withdraw, yote itaingia kwa account yako. So that 5% sasa ni the last academic year, the last financial year. But for now, the government has introduced 20% winnings on bet. So this is the finance bill 2026. Thank you for joining us. If you're just joining us, we are talking about the betting 20% on the finance bill. The government has introduced 20% tax on winnings. So for example, if you win 10,000, the government will take 20% of that 10,000, meaning you will remain with 8,000 and the government takes 2,000. So why is the government introducing this? Now, reasons for introducing tax on gambling. One of the reasons government is doing this is because they want to discourage betting. Many people are joined to betting. So the way in which government will now discourage people from betting is introducing tax, such as this 20% now. If you are just joining us, we are talking about 20% tax on winnings. So if you gamble now and you stake any amount and you win 10,000, you will not receive that exact value 10,000. In fact, you will receive just 80% of that winnings. So the government will take 2,000 and the remaining 8,000 belongs to you. That's the finance bill, guys. One of the taxes that has been introduced is the tax on 20% of bet winnings. So that is one of the tax. Another one tax is tax on digital services. So what does this mean? The bill does not directly introduce tax on sending money through M-Pesa or Airtel money. Instead, it proposes removing VAT exemption and digital finance. So hii haitaenda kwa M-Pesa direct. Let me repeat. So transactions za M-Pesa is the to hapo, transaction cost itabaki hapo, but instead serikali watatax 16% VAT on kwa hizi products, hizi PayPal, Mastercard and Visa. So let me repeat. The transaction cost on M-Pesa will remain the same, haitapanda wala itashuka, but yenye serikali wametax ni PayPal, Mastercard and Visa. So inamaanisha if you receive money via PayPal, the government will tax a certain amount. Okay, hope you understand Apple. The government will tax a certain amount because of the digital services. So this is what it entails on the finance bill 2026-2027 for the next financial year. We repeat again, we have tax on 20% of the bet winnings, yes, and then we look at tax on digital services and transactions. Now, another thing, the government has introduced taxes on mobile phones. What does this mean? Actually, this is now, introduce tax on mobile phones inamaanisha aje? Guys, thank you for joining. We're talking about the finance bill 2026. 2027, and we have said now what is in the finance bill 1 is tax on 20% of bet winnings. What does this mean? Serikali wameintroduce 20% of your bets, meaning that ukishinda 10,000 serikali wanachukua 20% of that 10,000, meaning you will remain with 8,000 and the government takes 2,000. Reasons why the government has introduced this tax now. One of the reasons is because to discourage betting. The government has introduced 20% tax on betting to avoid or to make people not bet again, yani to reduce the number of gamblers in the market. Another one is to make people gamble responsibly. Another reason is to make the government earns revenue to this gambling. Another reason now we are talking about is here, increase taxes on mobile phones. What does this mean? The government has introduced 25% tax on imported phones. So guys, thank you for joining. We are talking about Finance Bill 2026, and we have said that Finance Bill 2026 includes tax on 20%. Kama ujaelewa, acha nikueleze tu ya mwisho within the shortest time. The government has introduced 20% tax on bet winnings. Inamaanisha ukibet ushinde 10,000, serikali wanachukua 20% of that 10,000, meaning you will remain with 2,000. 2,000 inaendea kwa serikali, alafu 8,000 inakuja kwako. So watu wa gambling hii imeshikwa sasa. If the government takes 20% of your winnings, you will remain with 8,000. 8,000 inakuja kwako while 2,000 inaendea kwa serikali. So inategemea na uta win. So the government has introduced this because they want to discourage people from betting. Another reason is because to make people gamble responsibly. Another one is the government to earn revenue. So we're talking about the last reason is because increased taxes on mobile phones. So the government has introduced 25% tax on mobile phones that are imported to Kenya. Kama simu inaingia Kenya, hizi zinakatwa. So guys, we are talking about the finance bill. One of the things that is in the finance bill ni tax on 20% bet winnings. So kama wewe ni gambler alafu umebet, alafu ukashinda nini? Ukashinda 10,000. Kushinda 10,000 na maanisha serikali wanachukua 20% of that 10,000. 20% of that 10,000 inamaanisha utabakiwa na 8,000, serikali wachukua 2,000. So inakuwa hasara sana. Because of gambling, it is yani ni risk, either win or loss. The government has introduced 20% of that 10,000 now to prevent people. Here are some reasons why the government has introduced this tax on betting. To discourage betting. Another one, to make people gamble responsibly. And the last reason is the government earns revenue through this. So those are some of the ways in which the government has made people to avoid gambling. One of the last reasons is because of the increased taxes. So guys, these are the finance bill 2026. So the finance bill 2026 now inapitishwa on, yani sahi kuna public participation is from date 1 to date 9 or 10 hapo. In public participation, yani the public sasa wanachangia kwa hiyo finance bill. Another one is from date 11 sasa mpaka date 28 or 20, let's say 28 hapo. Hii sasa inakuwa discussed. The members of parliament wanakaa chini, wanachambua hiyo finance bill proposal, wanakaa chini wanachambua kabisa. Now if this finance bill passes through, the next thing is President Ruto presidential assent. Now the president now assents this bill into what? Into law. So if everything goes well, if everything goes well through this, these are the proposed taxes. Now on that 1 to that 9 of June, there is public participation. On that 11 to the 28th of June also, there is public this debate in parliament. The members of parliament wanakaa chini wanachambua article per article of the proposed finance bill. Now, as from before the 1st of July, there is the presidential assent. The president assents the proposed finance bill now into law. So it is before July, before the beginning of every financial year. As financial year begins, mostly as financial year inaanzia 1st of July each year. So guys, these are some of the things that is proposed in the finance bill 2026. Kama uko na swali, let me know in the comment section guys. I really appreciate if you could help me by subscribe to this channel, share this live, and also comment. Let me know your comment section. Thank you, and may the Almighty bless you all. If you are just joining us, we are talking about the finance bill 2026. One of the taxes introduced is 20% tax on bet winnings, meaning if you bet to 20, if you bet and you win 10,000, umeshinda 10,000, utachukua hiyo 10,000. Hiyo 10,000 itakuja directly kwa M-Pesa yako, but the government will now take 20% of that 10,000, meaning utabaki na 8,000 ikuja M-Pesa balance yako, and then 2,000 itaenda serikali. You are just joining us. We are talking about the finance bill 2026. These are some of the things introduced proposed in the finance bill. 20% bet on betting. So given a gambling squeeze imekuwa ngumu because serikali wameintroduce 20%, inamaanisha ukistake win 10,000, hiyo 10,000 itakuja kwako. 20%, which is 20% of that 10,000, inamaanisha 8,000 itakuja kwa M-Pesa yako, while the remaining 20%, which is 2,000, inaenda serikali. So this is in gambling, specifically in gambling, that is 20%. Serikali wameleta 20% because they want now to, here are some of the reasons the government increases the tax on gambling. First of all is to discourage betting. They reduce the number of people doing gambling. And then the next reason is to make people gamble responsibly. Another one is the government earns revenue through this gambling. So due to 20%, 2%, 2,000 and serikali. So the government earns this basically through gambling. So if you learned something, kindly consider subscribing. Thank you, and may the Almighty God bless you. Bye guys.